A 17-year-old girl boards her first ever flight, holding a scholarship ticket for a seat in first class. But just minutes after sitting down, a powerful airline executive confronts her, insisting she doesn't belong there. He accuses her of faking the ticket in front of everyone. What he doesn't know? She's the daughter of a whistleblower he helped destroy 20 years ago, and what she's carrying in her coat pocket could bring down everything he built. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Callie sat quietly by the window in seat 3C, her back straight and her hands folded neatly over her denim bag. The boarding pass peeked out of her coat pocket, printed with her full name, Callie Venson. She had checked it at least 5 times, not because she was unsure, but because she couldn't believe it was real. A flight, alone, in first class. Just a few days ago, she had been sweeping floors after her part-time shift at the school auditorium, wondering if her college dreams would slip away because of one missed deadline. Then out of nowhere, she got the call. An anonymous scholarship, fully covered trip to attend a music composition workshop in Seattle. No explanation, no signature. Just a plane ticket and a note that read, "Your talent deserves to be heard." The plane hadn't taken off yet, and most passengers were still boarding. Callie kept her headphones in, trying not to stare too long at the glossy finish of the cabin, or the silverware wrapped neatly on her tray table. It all felt borrowed, like something she'd have to give back. Then came Mr. Aldrin, a man in his early 50s dressed in a sharp gray suit and expensive cologne. He was arguing with someone on the phone 2 rows ahead, pacing slightly, his tone clipped and annoyed. His voice had the kind of sharpness that made people shrink without him yelling. He ended the call with a frustrated sigh, turned around, and then froze when his eyes landed on Callie. For a moment, she thought maybe she had something on her face. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, but Mr. Aldrin kept staring. He stepped closer, stopping right beside her seat. His face tightened like he had seen a ghost. "You shouldn't be here," he said, quiet but direct. Callie blinked. "I'm sorry." "This seat," he said slowly. "This whole thing. Who sent you?" She looked up at him, confused. "No one sent me. I have a ticket." He leaned in slightly. "You don't know who I am, do you?" She frowned. "No, I don't." Mr. Aldrin turned sharply to the aisle as Mira, one of the flight attendants, passed by. She was tall and slim, with a name badge pinned neatly above her blazer. Her smile was automatic, but it faded quickly when she saw the tension. "Is everything all right here?" Mira asked. Mr. Aldrin's voice stayed low. "She's not supposed to be in this cabin. You need to check her boarding pass." Callie felt her stomach twist. People nearby had started to glance over, pretending to adjust their seats or stretch, but clearly listening. Mira looked at Callie kindly. "Can I see your pass, sweetheart?" Callie pulled it from her coat pocket with a trembling hand and handed it to her. Mira scanned it, her eyes moving from the name to the seat number to the barcode. Then she looked up and said clearly, "It's valid. Seat 3C. It's all correct." Mr. Aldrin's jaw clenched. "Then someone in your system made a mistake." Callie looked at him, voice steady but soft. "Why do you think I don't belong here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer to Mira and whispered something in her ear. Mira's smile vanished completely. She looked down at the ticket again, then at Callie, and her expression changed. Not angry, not kind, just cold. "I need you to come with me," she said. Callie's throat tightened. "Why?" "What did he say?" "I just need you to come to the front for a quick verification," Mira replied, her voice practiced. Passengers shifted in their seats, avoiding Callie's eyes. She picked up her bag and stood slowly, following Mira toward the front. She didn't turn to look at Mr. Aldrin again, but she could feel him watching her the entire way. She had no idea what was going on, but whatever it was, it had nothing to do with her ticket. and something told her it had everything to do with why Mr. Aldrin looked at her like she wasn't a stranger at all. Callie followed Mira toward the front of the plane, her boots making soft thuds on the carpeted aisle. Her palms were damp, and the inside of her throat felt tight. She hadn't done anything wrong, but the way Mira avoided looking at her, like she was already guilty, made her feel smaller with every step. When they reached the small space near the flight attendant's galley, Mira motioned for Callie to wait. The curtain separating first class from the cockpit was half drawn. Callie could hear the hum of the engines and muffled boarding announcements, but her focus was narrowed on the whispering voices just a few feet away. Mira disappeared behind the curtain for a moment. She was talking to someone, and though the words weren't clear, the tone was sharp, nervous almost. Then another voice entered the mix. Calm, older, male. That voice didn't sound panicked at all. After another minute, Mira returned, expression unreadable. Callie, she said gently, can you tell me how you got this ticket? I got it through a scholarship, Callie replied. It was sent to me with a note, for a music workshop in Seattle. I didn't book it myself. Mira nodded slowly. And the name on the note? There wasn't one, just the message. Your talent deserves to be heard, that's all. Mira glanced down at the ticket again. Do you know a man named Nolan Aldrin? Callie shook her head. No. Mira hesitated, then stepped aside as another person approached. He was shorter than Aldrin, in his late 60s maybe, with wispy white hair and small glasses. His crew ID hung from his neck. I'm Captain Soren, he said with a kind but serious tone. Can you come with me just for a minute? I promise, we just want to clear something up. Callie stared at him. Am I in trouble? No, he said quickly. Not at all. She followed him to a small nook near the front, where a narrow jump seat folded out from the wall. He offered it to her and she sat, hugging her bag tightly to her chest. Captain Soren sat across from her. Mr. Aldrin claims he knows you, he said carefully. He insists you're here to cause a scene. Callie frowned. But I've never seen him before in my life. Are you sure? He asked. He says you're connected to something from his past, something personal. Callie stared at him. Captain, I swear, I don't even know his name until today. I got this ticket from a school program, that's it. He nodded thoughtfully, then leaned forward. What's your last name again? Venson, she replied. The captain's eyebrows lifted slightly. Callie noticed. Why? What is it? Captain Soren sat back. There was once a woman named Evelyn Venson. She was a flight engineer. Brilliant. She worked with this airline almost 20 years ago. She disappeared from the industry overnight. No one knew why. Callie blinked. That's my mother's name. The captain didn't respond right away. From behind the curtain, Mira stepped forward again, whispering something to him. He stood quickly. Stay here for just a moment. As he left, Callie's heart pounded harder than before. The cold air in the galley hit her skin, but it wasn't the chill that made her shiver. She had come to this flight hoping to start something new, but now it felt like she was waking something up that had never been buried properly. Callie sat frozen, staring at the edge of the curtain Captain Soren had disappeared behind. The mention of her mother's name hit like a wave she hadn't seen coming. Evelyn Venson. She hadn't heard that name spoken by a stranger in years. Her mother rarely talked about her time before Callie was born. All Callie knew was that she had once worked in aviation, then left suddenly and never spoke about it again. She clutched the strap of her bag tighter, her fingers curling into the worn fabric. What did Mr. Aldrin have to do with her mother? And why was he acting like he'd seen a ghost when he looked at her? Moments later, the curtain rustled, but it wasn't Captain Soren who returned. It was Mr. Aldrin. He stepped into the narrow space, towering above her. This close, Callie noticed something different in his eyes. Less certainty, more unease. I knew it, he said quietly, not with anger, but almost with disbelief. You're her daughter. Callie stood up slowly. You knew my mom? He didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered over her face like he was searching for pieces of someone else. Then he scoffed under his breath and shook his head. I told her she'd ruin everything, he muttered. She couldn't just let things be. Callie took a small step back. What are you talking about? Evelyn was the reason I nearly lost my career, he snapped, voice still low but colder now. She reported a safety cover-up to corporate, an issue with the altitude sensors in the newer jets. I told her to keep quiet. Everyone did. But she filed a formal complaint and then, overnight, she vanished. Corporate buried the story. But I knew she left something behind. Callie's heart pounded. She left everything behind. She was blacklisted. She had to start over with nothing. Mr. Aldrin looked at her sharply. She chose that. She knew the risk. No, Callie said firmly. She believed someone would do the right thing. He crossed his arms. And now you're here, sitting in 3C like it's some poetic justice. Did she send you? Is this her idea of revenge? Callie shook her head. She doesn't even know I'm on this flight, and I didn't choose this seat. The scholarship did. Mr. Aldrin's jaw worked side to side. Then he leaned closer. Listen carefully. You may think this is some perfect coincidence, but it's not. If this becomes public, if anyone finds out you're Evelyn's daughter, they'll come for you too, just like they came for her. So take your little ticket, go sit in coach, and pretend you were never here. Before Callie could respond, the curtain drew back again. Captain Soren stepped in, eyes moving between them. That's enough, Nolan. Mr. Aldrin turned sharply. She doesn't belong up here. Captain Soren's voice was steel. Neither did Evelyn, but she was right, and you weren't. And you're about to make the same mistake twice. He turned to Callie, his tone softening. You can return to your seat now, Miss Venson. And if anyone questions your place there again, you send them to me. Mr. Aldrin's mouth opened, but before he could speak, the captain added without turning, and you'll remain silent for the rest of this flight unless you're spoken to. Am I clear? Mr. Aldrin stared at them both, his lips tight, then stormed off without another word. Callie stood still for a second, unsure if her legs would move. Captain Soren gave her a faint smile. Your mother saved lives. Some of us haven't forgotten that. Callie didn't speak. She just nodded, her throat tight, then walked slowly back down the aisle toward seat 3C. Only now, she wasn't wondering if she belonged. She was wondering what else her mother had never told her. Callie settled back into seat 3C, but the soft leather no longer felt luxurious. Her mind raced with everything Mr. Aldrin had said. A cover-up, her mother, the threat. She had boarded the plane thinking this trip would be about music, about her future. Now it felt like she had walked straight into a chapter of her mother's past that had never really closed. Across the aisle, a woman with a red scarf glanced at her, then quickly looked away. People were whispering. The awkward tension from earlier hadn't gone unnoticed. Even though Mr. Aldrin had returned to his seat, the air still felt charged, like everyone was waiting for something else to happen. Callie pulled her bag onto her lap and quietly unzipped the front pocket. Inside was a small black notebook, not the one she used for song ideas, but the one she had found in a box in the attic last year. It had belonged to her mother. She hadn't understood most of what was inside, just page after page of diagrams, codes, and what looked like aviation maintenance notes. She had tucked it away without asking questions, sensing her mother didn't want to revisit those days. Now, she opened it slowly and flipped to the third page. Handwritten at the top were the words, Jetline 218/ALD-RP system/fail pattern, consistent above FL 300 below. It was a series of numbers, sketches, and highlighted text. One word repeated several times. Aldrin. Callie's breath caught. He wasn't just someone who knew her mother. He had been part of the very problem she had tried to expose. Her fingers hovered over the page. Her mother had written this years ago, back when Callie was still in preschool, back when Evelyn had gone to late-night meetings and came home quieter than usual. It hadn't made sense then, but it did now. This wasn't just about the seat. Mr. Aldrin had recognized her, because he had been waiting for something like this to resurface. Callie carefully zipped the notebook back up and stared out the window. Clouds floated calmly outside, the sky bright and quiet. But inside the plane, her thoughts turned heavy. The silence was broken by Mira, who returned with a small glass of water. She placed it on Callie's tray and leaned in. "I don't usually say much," Mira whispered, "but I was there that day, when your mom handed in that report. I was an intern then." Callie looked at her stunned. "She did the right thing," Mira continued, her voice tight. "People were scared, and Aldrin. He used every connection he had to erase what she uncovered, but a few of us, quiet ones, we remembered." Callie didn't know what to say. Mira straightened up. "He's scared of you. That's why he wanted you gone." Callie stared at her glass, the reflection of the cabin ceiling flickering across its surface. "I didn't even know she had gone through all that," she said softly. "She never told me." "Maybe she thought it was over," Mira replied. "But the truth doesn't stay buried forever." As Mira walked away, Callie sat in stillness. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just following her future. She was holding a piece of her mother's unfinished story, and someone on this plane still wanted that story buried. Callie sat motionless, her fingers curled tightly around the armrest. Her mind drifted far from the flight path, back to the attic where she had first found her mother's old black notebook. She remembered the dust, the way it had been buried beneath boxes of holiday decorations and old coats. She hadn't even told her mom she'd found it. Something about the way Evelyn had sealed that part of her life off had always made Callie afraid to ask. Now, those same scribbled notes were the only proof that something bigger had happened. Something that had nearly destroyed her mother, and now threatened to find her daughter in the middle of a first-class cabin. Across the aisle, Mr. Aldrin sat still, arms folded tightly across his chest. His jaw worked as if chewing invisible words he couldn't say aloud. Callie couldn't hear him, but she didn't need to. His body language said everything, agitated, cornered, and watching her every move like she might stand up and yell his name to the whole cabin. But she didn't. She just turned her gaze forward, pretending he didn't exist. A few rows behind, Mira leaned against the galley door, watching. She looked torn, like someone who had kept a secret for too long and wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it in. A minute later, she approached again, crouching discreetly beside Callie's seat. "I need to tell you something," Mira said under her breath, glancing toward the aisle to make sure no one was listening. "After your mom filed her report, she didn't just get blacklisted, she got threatened." Callie's eyes widened. "Threatened by who?" "Not directly," Mira said, voice tight. "But flights she was assigned to suddenly got canceled without notice. Her clearance codes were revoked. She was removed from engineering briefings. Then, quietly, she was told her presence was creating instability in the workplace. That's how they do it. Quiet pressure, isolation, until you leave on your own." Callie's throat tightened. "So they pushed her out, without ever saying it to her face." Mira nodded slowly. "Mr. Aldrin was one of the senior advisors in the pilot maintenance division back then. He wasn't just involved. He led the dismissal recommendation." Callie's hands shook as she pulled the notebook out from her bag again, showing Mira the notes. She mentioned him in this, the fail pattern, the jet line 218. Mira's eyes scanned the page. That system malfunctioned twice before it was finally recalled, but both times the reports were marked as resolved by flight team. Evelyn's report was the first time someone formally documented it as a design flaw. That meant someone had to be held accountable. Callie swallowed hard, and he made sure it wasn't him. Before Mira could respond, a sudden ding from the intercom cut through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Please remain seated as we begin preparations for departure. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Callie gripped the armrest again, her pulse thudding in her ears. She didn't feel safe, not because of the plane, but because of the man sitting just a few feet away, the one who had buried her mother's truth and now acted like her presence was a personal attack. Mira rose to her feet, pausing before returning to her duties. "He won't try anything up here," she whispered. "But be careful when you land. I wouldn't be surprised if someone tries to intercept you." Callie blinked. "Intercept me?" Mira gave a quick nod. If word spreads that Evelyn's daughter was seen flying with that notebook in her bag, someone will want to know what else you have. A wave of cold dread swept through Callie's chest. She suddenly realized this flight wasn't just about getting to Seattle anymore. It wasn't even about music. She had unknowingly walked into the second act of a story that was never supposed to continue. And this time she wasn't the background character. She was the one carrying the proof. As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, Callie stared straight ahead, the hum of the engines doing little to steady the storm building inside her. Her mind spun in 1,000 directions. She tried to focus on the facts. Mr. Aldrin had a history with her mother, had silenced her whistleblowing, and now, 2 decades later, was visibly shaken to see her daughter in first class, holding a notebook that shouldn't exist anymore. That part was clear. But what wasn't clear, what terrified her more than anything, was why now? Why had that anonymous scholarship been sent now of all times? Why that specific seat? Why had her mother never told her any of this? As the wheels lifted off the ground and the pressure pressed her back into her seat, a sharp memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought about in years. She was maybe 8 or 9, sitting at the kitchen table while her mother stood in the laundry room. Unaware, Callie could hear her whispering on the phone. The words were muffled, but one phrase stood out, clear and haunting. "If anything happens, she knows nothing. She doesn't even know who he is." At the time, Callie had assumed it was about her absent father. But now she wasn't so sure. Once the seatbelt sign chimed off, Callie opened the notebook again. There were names listed on the last page. Some had question marks beside them. One name had been circled twice, Griffin Caro. Beneath it was a single phrase. He approved the flight hours falsification report. She had never heard of him before. But if her mother had written his name and circled it like that, it meant something. She turned to her phone and searched for a signal, knowing full well there wouldn't be one until landing. Still, her fingers hovered over the screen, as if sheer desperation could summon a connection. She didn't want to wait until Seattle. She needed to understand what she had walked into before someone tried to silence her the way they had silenced her mother. A soft tap interrupted her train of thought. Callie looked up. A flight attendant, Jonas, the one who had remained in the background most of the flight, stood beside her, holding a small silver envelope. "This came from the pilot," he said, handing it to her with a neutral expression. She hesitated, then took it. As Jonas turned away, she unfolded the envelope slowly. Inside was a folded note, written in tight, careful handwriting. "There's a folder in seat 3A. It was left intentionally. Do not let anyone see it before landing. Use the bathroom light to read it. Do not use the overhead." Her stomach clenched. Callie's eyes darted toward 3A, 1 seat ahead, across the aisle. It was currently empty. Her fingers twitched. She waited a beat, watching to see if Aldrin was paying attention, but he was turned away, pretending to read a magazine, though his eyes hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Casually, as if stretching her legs, Callie slipped out of her seat and leaned into 3A, pretending to adjust the seatbelt. Her fingers slid under the cushion, then the side panel, and finally found a thin, hard folder tucked between the seat frame and the shell. She pulled it free and quickly slipped it under her coat before returning to her seat. Heart pounding, she waited until the aisle cleared and the cabin lights dimmed for cruising altitude. Then, folder in hand, she made her way to the bathroom. Once inside the tiny space, she flipped on the small mirror light and opened the folder. Inside were printed documents, technical logs, maintenance schedules, engineer signatures. But what caught her breath was the heading printed across the top of the first page. Unauthorized modification record, ALD-RP altimeter sync. There was a date, March 12, 2004. Her mother had filed her report in April of that same year. Attached was a memo stamped confidential. The signature at the bottom? Griffin Caro. So the man her mother circled had not only known about the fault, he had signed off on it. And somehow this file had found its way into Callie's hands mid-flight, hidden under a seat she hadn't even chosen. Her vision swam. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her to have this. But who? And more importantly, why now? As she stared at the folder, a knock came at the bathroom door. One knock, a pause, then another. Callie's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the rhythm of someone needing the restroom. It was a signal. Callie froze, gripping the folder tightly against her chest. The knock hadn't sounded urgent. It hadn't come with a voice or a hello, like someone needing to use the bathroom. It was measured. One knock, a pause, then one more. Just like a pattern. A cue. She didn't move. Her pulse thudded so loudly in her ears she could barely hear the hum of the plane. Her thumb instinctively slid over the corner of the folder, as if guarding it would somehow keep her safe. The knock didn't come again. Silence settled outside. After 30 more seconds, she slowly cracked the door open, just enough to peek into the aisle. It was empty. The lights were low, passengers tucked into their seats. A few TV screens glowed. Some eyes were shut, others distracted. No one stood near the bathroom door. No one looked in her direction. She stepped out cautiously, the folder tucked inside her sweatshirt now, the edges digging into her ribs. She walked slowly back toward row 3, but as she passed the curtain separating first class from the galley, someone stepped out of the shadows. It was Jonas, the quiet male flight attendant who had given her the envelope. Callie startled slightly, but he held up one hand gently. "It was me," he whispered. The knock. Her eyes widened. "You sent the folder?" He nodded once, glancing behind her to make sure no one else was within earshot. "It belonged to a former technician. He left it behind years ago, stored under that seat. I found it by chance during a maintenance check 2 months back. I wasn't supposed to keep it. But I knew what it meant." "Why give it to me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because," Jonas said, looking directly at her, "you're the only person who could do something with it. You're Evelyn Venson's daughter. That means something to people who still care about what's right." Callie's eyes narrowed. "So you knew her too?" "Everyone did," he said quietly. "She was smart, strong, a threat to people who lied for convenience. When she vanished, we all got the message. Stay quiet or disappear too. But she wasn't wrong. And neither are you." Callie's breath wavered. "I don't even know what to do with this." Jonas shook his head. "You don't need to decide now. Just keep it hidden. When you land, there'll be a man near baggage claim. His name is Elliot Crane, mid-60s, white coat, gray folder in hand. He'll act like he's waiting for someone. Hand him the documents. He used to be your mother's mentor before she left." "Why not give them to someone else on the plane?" she asked. "Why not the captain?" "Because there are still people loyal to Aldrin, maybe even in management. You don't know who's watching anymore." Callie glanced around. "And if Aldrin finds out I have it?" Jonas hesitated. "Then you need to get off this plane without drawing attention." He handed her a folded page. It looked like a boarding pass, but the details were slightly altered. "This makes it look like you were seated in 19B, he said, "just in case anyone asks later." She stared at him. "You planned all this?" "No," he said, "but I've been waiting a long time for the right person to show up." Jonas straightened and backed away, vanishing through the curtain. Callie returned to her seat in 3C, heart racing, hands clenched under the blanket now covering her lap. As she sat down, her eyes drifted to Mr. Aldrin again. He was watching her. Not obviously, just a flicker of his gaze, shifting quickly when she turned her head. But it was enough to make her skin crawl. He knows something, she thought. But so do I now. She leaned back in her seat, clutching the folder under the blanket, feeling the weight of something bigger than herself in her hands. Her mother's fight wasn't over. It had just found its second wind, and this time, it had Callie's voice behind it. The flight continued, high above the clouds, cutting through the night sky like a silent secret. But Callie's thoughts were anything but quiet. Her pulse was steady now, but her mind raced. Every conversation, every clue, every name playing in a loop. She had started this day as a girl headed to a music workshop. Now she sat quietly on a plane, carrying a folder that could ruin careers, maybe even reshape part of the aviation industry. And there was no way back. She pretended to sleep for a while, curling up slightly in her seat, blanket over her knees. She didn't dare look at Mr. Aldrin again, though she felt his gaze every so often, like a breeze across her cheek. It was the kind of look someone gave when they couldn't stop thinking about what you might do next, but didn't know how to stop you without revealing their own guilt. The folder under her sweatshirt pressed firmly against her ribs with each breath. She hadn't dared to open it again. Not here, not with so many eyes around her. The light from her window was faint, almost blue now. The world outside looked peaceful, but her insides told a different story. She looked around the cabin. Mira walked quietly from one row to another, offering water, checking on elderly passengers. Her face gave away nothing now. She moved like someone who had years of practice hiding fear under routine. Jonas hadn't come by again since their brief exchange, and the captain's voice hadn't returned since takeoff. The silence didn't feel natural anymore. It felt calculated. Then came the unexpected. The PA system beeped. A long pause, then, "Miss Callie Venson, please make your way to the forward galley. You are requested by the pilot." Every muscle in her body went stiff. She glanced to Mira, who immediately froze mid-step and looked back at her. There was fear in Mira's eyes, but not shock, as if she had expected this moment to come, just not so soon. Callie slowly stood, folding her blanket and slipping the folder deeper under her arm beneath her coat. She forced her hands to remain calm even though they tingled with anxiety. All eyes in first class were now on her. As she stepped past Aldrin's row, he leaned slightly into the aisle. "Big moment, isn't it?" he said softly. Callie didn't stop. She didn't look at him. She kept walking. When she reached the curtain, Mira stepped closer. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "don't hand over the folder, not even if they say it's for verification. You understand?" Callie gave the faintest nod. Mira opened the curtain and Callie stepped through into the dim galley. Captain Soren stood there, arms folded, back straight. But something was off. He wasn't alone. Next to him stood a man in a navy vest, with slicked-back blonde hair and a badge pinned to his chest. Deputy In-Flight Security Liaison. His nameplate read, Reynolds. "Miss Venson," Reynolds said coolly, "we've had an anonymous alert concerning a document in your possession. For security reasons, we'll need to inspect your personal items." Callie's heart dropped. She had expected a confrontation, maybe with Aldrin, but not someone wearing federal authority. The captain looked uneasy. He didn't make eye contact. Reynolds stepped closer. "Please understand, this is a standard safety procedure. You may return to your seat afterward." Callie forced her lips to move. "Who reported me?" "I'm afraid that information is protected," he replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll please cooperate." Her eyes flicked to Captain Soren. "Are you allowing this?" He spoke finally, voice low. "Miss Venson, I wasn't informed of this until moments ago. I've voiced my concern, but per FAA in-flight security protocol, I cannot override a formal alert logged by security personnel." Reynolds extended a gloved hand. Callie's mind worked at lightning speed. If she gave the folder now, it would disappear, quietly like her mother's report. There'd be no proof, no trail, no Elliot Crane waiting in baggage claim. Just another cover-up. She exhaled slowly. "Fine," she said. "I'll hand it over." She reached into her coat, but not for the folder. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" Reynolds asked, his tone sharpening. Callie's voice rang louder than expected. "Recording." She tapped the screen. "Just so we're clear, you're asking a minor mid-flight to surrender confidential documents without a warrant, and you're refusing to name the accuser." Reynolds stepped back slightly. That's not necessary. I think it is, she interrupted, because I'm not giving you anything without legal authorization. You're not law enforcement, and this isn't your jurisdiction. Mira stepped through the curtain at that moment, holding a tray. Everything all right, Captain? The captain stared at Callie. Then he slowly nodded. She's within her rights, he said quietly. Reynolds narrowed his eyes but said nothing. After a tense pause, he stepped aside. You may return to your seat. Callie didn't move right away. She stared at him until he looked away. Then she turned and walked slowly back down the aisle. The folder stayed hidden. Her pulse was racing, but for the first time since takeoff, she felt something new. Control, the quiet kind her mother must have had when she stood her ground. And now, Callie had done the same. Callie walked back to her seat with steady steps, her breath shallow but her spine straight. The adrenaline buzzed through her limbs like electricity, but she didn't show it. She couldn't afford to. Not yet. Every second on this plane had become a test of how far she was willing to go to protect what she had, and the decision she had just made in front of Reynolds had drawn a sharp line in the sand. Passengers looked at her curiously as she passed, but no one said a word. Some seemed to admire her courage. Others simply didn't want to be involved. Mr. Aldrin was still in his seat, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He didn't say anything this time. His silence was louder than any insult he could have thrown. Callie sat down again in 3C and pulled the blanket back over her lap, her hand firmly clutching the folder beneath it. Mira walked past moments later, stopping just long enough to drop a napkin on her tray table. Callie opened it carefully. Written in small, looping handwriting were 6 words. You just bought time, not safety. She folded the napkin and slipped it into her bag. She understood what it meant. Reynolds had backed off, for now. But people like him didn't forget when they were embarrassed, especially in front of a captain and a camera. Her little act of defiance would ripple beyond this flight, and time was all she had left to use wisely. The rest of the flight passed in a strange kind of quiet. Drinks were served, movies flickered on screens. The rhythm of flight returned to normal. But not for Callie. Her nerves hummed beneath the surface. Her thoughts spun constantly. What if Reynolds intercepted her after landing? What if someone from Aldrin's circle got to Elliot Crane first? What if this was all a setup? The scholarship, the seat assignment, even Jonas. But every time the doubt crept up, she looked down at the folder, and she remembered what was inside. Real names, real documents, real damage. She took out her mother's notebook again and flipped to the final page. Tucked between 2 blank sheets was a folded sticky note she hadn't noticed before. On it, written in red ink, was a question. If it ever finds you, will you be ready? It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was undeniably her mother's. Callie's throat tightened. She felt something shift in her chest. Not fear this time, but resolve. Her mother hadn't just tried to expose the truth. She had prepared for this moment, for Callie to step in, not by force, but by choice. The captain's voice returned over the intercom an hour later, announcing their descent into Seattle. Seat backs straightened, tray tables locked. Mira came by and gave Callie a long, quiet look before disappearing behind the curtain again. Jonas did not return. As the wheels touched down, Callie stared out the window, gripping the folder like it was part of her. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to what she carried. Passengers stood and stretched, chatting about connections and carry-ons. But Callie remained seated, waiting for the aisle to clear. When she finally stood and walked off the plane, the terminal lights felt blinding. She followed the signs toward baggage claim, every footstep echoing louder in her chest. And then she saw him. Standing near Carousel 7 was a tall man in his 60s, dressed in a white coat, holding a gray folder. He looked calm but alert. His eyes scanned the crowd, until they landed on her, Elliot Crane. He didn't smile, he didn't wave. He simply nodded once. Callie approached slowly, heart pounding again. "You're Elliot?" she asked. "I am," he replied. His voice was low, but carried weight. She reached into her coat, pulled out the folder, and held it out to him, but he didn't take it right away. You know what this is? He asked. I think so, she said. I think it's the reason my mom had to disappear. He studied her face. And you're willing to hand it over? Just like that? She paused, thinking hard. No, she said finally. Not just like that. I want to know what you're going to do with it. Elliot's eyes softened a fraction. Fair enough. He reached into his folder and handed her something, an old photo of Evelyn, smiling in a lab coat, standing beside two other engineers. Behind her, in the blurred background, was a younger version of Elliot himself. She was one of the best, he said, and she trusted me to carry this if she couldn't. But she never expected her daughter to be the one to finish what she started. Callie looked down at the photo, then back up at him. Neither did I, she said quietly. But I'm here now. Elliot took the folder gently from her hands, nodded once, and without another word, disappeared into the crowd. Callie stood there for a long moment, the weight of the folder gone from her arms but still present in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like her mother's silence made sense. She hadn't given up. She had handed it down. Quietly. And now, the fight had just entered a new phase. And it started with a girl in seat 3C. Callie didn't move right away. The fluorescent lights of the airport hummed overhead, indifferent to everything that had just happened. Around her, families reunited. Suitcases thudded onto carousels. Announcements echoed from distant speakers. It was all so normal, so mundane. And yet, just moments ago, she had passed along evidence that could alter the reputation of one of the biggest airline corporations in the country. The photo Elliot gave her trembled slightly in her hand. She studied her mother's face. Evelyn looked young in the picture, hopeful, proud, even joyful. It was a version of her Callie had never seen. Her mother at home was strong, yes, but tired. Worn from years of quiet sacrifices, she had never spoken bitterly, but now Callie saw how much she had swallowed just to protect the life they built together. A chime pulled Callie out of her thoughts. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She reached for it, surprised to see it finally had signal. A notification flashed across the screen. One new voicemail. She hesitated before playing it. It was from an unknown number. A man's voice crackled through the speaker. Calm, controlled, familiar. Miss Venson, I hope you know what you've done. That folder belonged to a sealed division of corporate oversight, and its release was never authorized. But I suppose that's the point. We should talk soon. Then a pause, and one final line. You've just started a clock that no one can stop. Click. The message ended. Callie stared at the phone, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. She didn't recognize the voice, but her instincts screamed that it was someone close to Aldrin, maybe even higher up, someone who had stayed in the background while Aldrin did the front-end damage. Whoever he was, he knew who she was now, and more importantly, he knew what she had just done. As she made her way toward the exit, she glanced over her shoulder more than once. A man with a duffel bag stood by the vending machines, seemingly staring into space. Another in a ball cap had followed a few too many of her steps. She wasn't paranoid. She was trained to pay attention now. Elliot had vanished, almost like he was never there. But she trusted he would know what to do with the documents. He was from her mother's circle, and her mother had always said, "Trust the ones who show you loyalty when there's nothing in it for them." Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Seattle's evening wind cut through the collar of her coat as she stepped toward the pickup lane. The rideshare app was still spinning when a black sedan pulled up in front of her. She hadn't ordered one. The window rolled down. Inside was Jonas. His tie was off and his uniform jacket had been replaced by a dark hoodie. "Get in," he said without preamble. She hesitated. "You said your part was done." "My part changed," he replied. "There's something you need to see." Callie looked around again, The man with the ball cap had stepped outside now, pretending to check his phone. She slid into the back seat without another word. The door locked automatically behind her. Jonas pulled out of the terminal in silence. For the first 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. They took exit ramps and back streets, and only when they were several miles from the airport did Jonas finally speak again. "I intercepted a message," he said, eyes still on the road. "From Reynolds. He was supposed to meet someone at a private airstrip tonight. The file was supposed to be retrieved and destroyed. They know you gave it to Elliot, and they want to shut it down before he goes public." Callie stiffened. "Do you know where?" Jonas nodded once. "I tracked the address. That's where we're going." She leaned forward. "What do you think they'll do to him?" "I don't know," Jonas said, "but Elliot's not the type to back down. He'll go through with it even if it costs him." "And what about you?" Callie asked. "Why are you helping me?" Jonas finally looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Because I didn't help your mother, and I've lived with that for 20 years. Silence fell again. Heavy, but different this time. Red taillights flickered across Callie's face as they stopped at an intersection. She realized then that this wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about memory, about legacy, about guilt and redemption, and about choosing, at the most inconvenient moment possible, to be brave anyway. She didn't know what they would find at the airstrip, but one thing was clear: she wasn't running anymore. She was going in. The drive to the airstrip felt longer than it was. Callie sat forward in her seat, hands pressed against the cool leather, eyes locked on the road ahead as the city lights slowly thinned and gave way to darker stretches of unlit back roads. Each turn Jonas made seemed to peel her further away from the ordinary world and deeper into a space where the rules had already been broken. They passed a rusted sign that read, "Private Aviation Access, Personnel Only." Its paint faded and edges chipped. Beyond it, a narrow road wound into dense trees. There were no street lamps. Only the car's headlights illuminated the path ahead, slicing through the fog that had begun to roll in from the water nearby. Jonas spoke for the first time in miles. "The hangar's just up ahead. He's supposed to meet a contact from the press, someone he's worked with before, if they intercept him before then." Callie didn't let him finish. "I understand," she said quietly. She didn't need more warnings. She already knew what was at stake. The file was no longer in her hands, but its weight had transferred into something deeper, something personal. She had become the thread unraveling a lie older than she was. That kind of truth didn't come without risk. The car pulled up behind a line of fencing. A gap in the chain link revealed a service gate that had been left slightly ajar. Jonas killed the engine and reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a small flashlight. "We'll walk the rest," he said, quietly. The air outside was thick and damp. As they crept along the perimeter, the sound of a distant engine rumbled overhead. A private jet coasted into the landing zone, its lights blinking against the foggy sky. They crouched behind a row of barrels near the side of the hangar, hearts pounding as they spotted movement inside. Two men stood beneath the overhead lights of the open hangar bay. One was Elliot Crane, still holding the gray folder, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. The other man was younger, dressed in jeans and a brown field jacket, clearly not airline personnel. He held a press badge around his neck and a camera bag slung over one shoulder. Callie exhaled slowly. He made it. But then, headlights cut through the trees behind them. Another vehicle. Black SUV. No markings. 3 men stepped out, all in suits. Their posture was too relaxed for them to be unaware. They had done this before. Their walk was deliberate, not aggressive yet, but prepared. The kind of calm that came just before something irreversible. Jonas pulled Callie back slightly. "That's Aldrin's damage crew," he whispered. "They won't make a scene here, but they're not here to talk either." One of the men approached Elliot and the journalist, flashing some kind of badge, too quickly to read. Elliot's body tensed. The journalist stepped forward objecting, but the suited man raised a hand and pointed directly at the folder. Jonas turned to Callie. They're going to try to confiscate it, or make it disappear. We need to make sure the handoff happens before that. Callie looked around quickly. A side door to the hangar was left slightly open. She gestured toward it. We get closer through there, she said. I'll create a distraction. You get the journalist out, get him to upload the files before they disappear. Jonas hesitated. That's too dangerous. Callie looked at him with a steady fire in her eyes. So was ignoring my mother. So was boarding this flight. I'm already in it, Jonas. Let me finish it. Without waiting for approval, she slipped away, hugging the wall of the hangar. Her breath fogged in the cold night air as she crept to the side entrance, pushed the door open silently, and stepped inside. From the shadows behind a row of grounded equipment carts, she could hear the conversation. We'll need to verify the source of those documents, one of the suits said sharply. These are stolen from a sealed archive. Elliot held his ground. These documents weren't stolen, they were preserved, because what your division buried almost cost hundreds of lives. The younger reporter raised his phone. I've already sent a summary to 3 editors. Try and stop it. That's when one of the suits stepped forward, hand reaching toward the folder. Callie acted. She stepped out from behind the carts and called out loud and clear, "If any of you touch him, this entire conversation goes live to 200,000 subscribers." Everyone turned. The man reaching for the folder froze. Elliot's eyes widened in surprise. The reporter looked relieved. The lead agent took one step toward her, but she lifted her phone and held it high. "You remember me?" she said to no one in particular. "Callie Venson, Evelyn's daughter, the one you didn't plan for." The silence that followed was a different kind of heavy. No one dared move. And then Jonas appeared behind the group, grabbing the journalist by the arm and whispering something fast. They ducked out through the side, folder in hand. The suited men saw too late. By the time they turned, the reporter and Jonas had vanished. Callie stood still as one of them approached her. "You've made a powerful mistake," he hissed. "No," she said, voice steady, even as her hand shook. "You did, 20 years ago. And I just made sure the world finally sees it." And with that, she turned and walked out the way she came, into the night, not with fear this time, but with the calm of someone who had just lit the match they could never take back. The cold air wrapped around Callie like a curtain as she stepped out of the hangar, her feet moving faster now. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The silence behind her said enough. Those men hadn't expected her, hadn't planned for a 17-year-old girl to walk into their guarded secrets and crack them open like glass. But it wasn't just her courage they hadn't counted on. It was her mother's legacy. As she slipped between the fence gate and back toward the shadowed car, she saw Jonas and the journalist already inside, the back hatch open, a laptop glowing in the dark. The folder lay open beside it, documents spread out, scanned pages uploading line by line through a secure satellite signal. Callie reached the car just as Jonas turned to her. "They'll realize soon that we didn't just send this to one outlet." She climbed into the back seat, still catching her breath. "You got multiple backups?" Jonas nodded. Elliot set it up with 3 journalists from different publications. One uploads, 2 mirror. The file goes down with one, the others carry it. The journalist, whose name she now learned was Micah, turned around from the front passenger seat. His hands trembled as he typed, adrenaline pumping through his system. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered. "The original report from Evelyn, the forged engineering sign-offs, a list of names who knew and approved the system flaws." He paused. "Your mother was 10 years ahead of her time." Callie didn't answer right away. She was watching the upload bar slowly ticking forward. 47%, 53%. The quiet tension in the car was razor sharp. Micah swallowed. "This is going to make people very angry." "Good," Callie replied. "Maybe it'll make them listen." But just as she said it, her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Unknown number? Too late to run. Walk away before you're dragged in further." She stared at it, her blood running cold. Not because of the threat, but because of how fast it came. They were watching her phone, tracking it maybe. She shoved it into airplane mode and dropped it onto the floor of the car. "We need to move," she said. "They're still tracing me." Jonas revved the engine, pulling away from the lot just as distant headlights reappeared near the hangar entrance. "They'll come after you now," Micah said. "You're a face, a name." "I know," she said. "And you're okay with that?" Callie looked out the window at the black trees whipping past, then turned to face him. "I used to think the biggest thing I'd ever do was win a scholarship. Now I've exposed one of the biggest cover-ups in aviation history. No, I'm not okay with it, but I'm not going to regret it either." Micah nodded, and in that moment the weight of what she had done began to shift. It didn't crush her, it carried her. They drove until the city lights came back into view. Jonas pulled off near a low-rise building with no sign out front, just a row of darkened windows and an alley tucked behind. A safe house Elliot had once used, now borrowed for a single night of transition. Inside, the space was cold but clean. Metal folding chairs, a small cot, a hot plate in the corner. Jonas locked the door behind them and pulled the shades. Micah went straight to work finishing the mirror uploads from his backup drive. Callie wandered into the small hallway and found a table with a few boxes stacked on top. She opened one, and inside were letters, old yellowed envelopes addressed to Evelyn Venson. She picked one up and unfolded it. "Evie, I know they're watching. I know you're scared. But what you uncovered could save hundreds of lives. If something happens to you, leave it to someone who will finish it. Someone who's not afraid to be louder than silence." There was no name signed, but Callie didn't need one. She understood now. This had never been about revenge. Not for her mother. Not for Elliot. Not even for Jonas. It had always been about the truth. She stepped back into the main room just as Micah stood and turned his laptop toward her. "It's done," he said. "All 3 uploads complete. Every document, every image, your story. It's going out at 6 a.m. across multiple time zones." Callie sat down slowly. There was no going back now. Somewhere across the country, men like Aldrin would wake up to headlines they couldn't erase. Boards would call emergency meetings. Legal teams would scramble. There would be denials, spin, damage control. But none of that would change the fact that the truth was out. Evelyn Venson had been right, and her daughter had made sure the world would know it. As the clock in the corner clicked past 3 a.m., Callie closed her eyes. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The hours that followed were thick with anticipation. Callie sat curled in one of the metal chairs, wrapped in an old gray blanket Jonas had found in a supply cabinet. She couldn't sleep, though her eyes were heavy. Her body ached from the tension, and her thoughts replayed everything. Boarding the plane, Aldrin's face, the folder, the knock on the bathroom door, the confrontation at the hangar. But none of that mattered anymore. In just under 3 hours, her mother's story would be published to the world. Finally, fully, and without anyone left to bury it. Jonas sat across the room, silently watching the street through the cracked blinds. He didn't speak, but his eyes told her everything. He expected retaliation. Maybe not tonight, maybe not even tomorrow, but it would come. The kind of pressure that didn't leave bruises, just closed doors, strange emails, silent phone calls in the middle of the night. Micah had finished the uploads and backed them up on 3 separate drives. He handed one to Callie, sealed in a static-proof pouch. "If anything happens to me or Jonas," he said, "take this to the nearest news station with a legal desk. Tell them everything. You'll be protected, eventually." Callie took the drive, but her face remained steady. "Nothing's happening to either of you. This isn't just my fight anymore." The room fell quiet again. The clock ticked past 4:30 a.m. Jonas brewed a bitter pot of coffee on the hot plate, and Callie sipped hers in silence, the taste sharp on her tongue but strangely grounding. Then, at 5:12 a.m., Micah's phone buzzed. He snatched it off the table and opened the notification. A moment later, he turned the screen around to show Callie. "Breaking. Former jetline engineer's daughter exposes suppressed safety scandal. 20-year cover-up confirmed. A second notification popped up beneath it. Whistleblower's daughter reveals sealed documents, forces federal reopening of ALDRP case. Then another, and another. They came in waves. Callie stared at the headlines, her heart thudding, not in fear, but in disbelief. It was real. After all the silence, all the shame, all the isolation her mother had endured, now everyone would know the truth. The articles led with Evelyn Venson's original report and its disappearance, linking it to 2 near-catastrophic aviation failures in the early 2000s. Screenshots of the folder documents were included, and Callie's name was mentioned, carefully, respectfully, as the person who brought the truth forward. Within 20 minutes, a national morning show ran a short teaser segment. Footage showed Evelyn's employee badge, a blurred photo of Callie entering the airport, and a still image of the folder on Micah's laptop screen. Commentary followed. A former airline executive anonymously quoted the documents as genuinely alarming. Jonas finally broke the silence. It's done. Callie's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't allowed herself to cry for days. Not the kind that came from fear, but the kind that came from freedom. She stood and stepped away from the others, needing a moment. She opened the safe house door just a crack and stepped out into the dawn light. The sky was pale orange, the streets still quiet. A few early risers walked dogs or jogged past, completely unaware of the storm brewing in boardrooms and legal departments across the country. The air smelled of wet pavement and the kind of stillness that came before a city fully woke up. And for the first time, Callie wasn't carrying anything. Not the notebook, not the folder, not the weight of silence. She pulled out her phone and opened her text messages. Her thumb hovered above her mom's name. Mom. She hadn't texted her since boarding the plane. Now, she typed slowly, "It's done. They know. I hope you're proud." She hit send, even though she wasn't sure if her mom would ever truly understand what had happened. But maybe, just maybe, she would. When she stepped back inside, Jonas looked up. It's spreading internationally. One of the pilots from Jetline's London office just issued a public statement in support of your mother. The FAA has announced an internal inquiry into multiple past certifications. Micah added, "Aldrin's name is trending, and not in a good way." Callie sat again, folding her hands in her lap. "Good," she whispered. "Let it all come out." Jonas poured more coffee and sat beside her, finally allowing himself to exhale. "You know what you just did, right?" Callie looked over. "I made sure the world heard my mother's voice," she said, "even if she never raised it." Jonas smiled faintly. "You've changed more than a policy. You've changed people." Callie didn't respond. She didn't need to. The clock on the wall read 5:57 a.m. 3 minutes to sunrise, and somewhere inside the rising light of a brand new day, Callie Venson sat quietly, no longer a passenger in someone else's story. She was the one who rewrote it. By the time the sun fully rose over Seattle, Callie could feel it in her bones. The world was shifting. Light poured through the blinds of the safe house, casting long stripes across the concrete floor. The silence in the room was no longer tense or expectant. It was reflective, still, like a breath after a long-held scream. Micah's phone buzzed non-stop now. Calls from editors, reporters, legal contacts, and 2 public advocacy groups. They all wanted statements, clarifications, access to the full report. They wanted interviews with Callie, with Jonas, with anyone who had touched the folder. Jonas declined every request. "We don't talk to the press directly," he said, "not until we know what the board will do." Callie sat on the edge of the cot, staring down at the thumb drive Micah had given her earlier. She still couldn't believe how small it was. Something that could fit on a keychain had just broken open a 20-year cover-up. It seemed impossible even now. She thought of her mother. What would she say? Would she be angry that Callie had gotten involved? Or proud? Would she be afraid for her? Callie couldn't answer any of those questions. Not yet. She pulled out her phone again. Her mother still hadn't replied to the message she'd sent hours ago. But as if on cue, a new notification buzzed on her lock screen. Incoming call. Mom Callie's heart jumped. She stepped into the hallway for privacy and accepted. Mom. Her voice was hesitant. She hadn't spoken to Evelyn in over a day, and it felt like a year had passed since she boarded that plane. There was a pause on the other end. Then Evelyn's voice, quiet, measured, but unmistakably shaken. Is it true? Callie's throat tightened. Yes. Another pause. All of it? Yes, Callie whispered. The documents, the file you kept hidden. I found your notebook, and someone gave me the original records. I didn't plan to go looking for it, I swear, but once I knew, once I saw your name in Aldrin's, I couldn't walk away. A breath. Then her mother said, You shouldn't have had to carry that. I didn't want to carry it, Callie said, but I also couldn't pretend it wasn't real. I saw how much it cost you, Mom. I needed people to know. The line was quiet for a long time. Callie almost thought the call had dropped. Then Evelyn spoke again. When I left the airline, they said I was paranoid, overdramatic, that I misunderstood the data. They made me doubt what I knew, even after all the training, all the proof. I stopped trying to prove them wrong. I just got tired. I know, Callie said gently, but I never stopped hoping someone would believe me, that the silence wouldn't be permanent. Callie's voice cracked. It's not. Evelyn breathed deeply, audibly. You know they'll come after you now, right? That they'll try to discredit you? I know, Callie said, but I don't care anymore. There was something new in her mother's silence now, something fuller, a kind of quiet that had nothing to do with fear or shame, and everything to do with finally being understood. You did what I couldn't, Evelyn said finally. You finished it. No, Callie said. We did. When the call ended, Callie stood in the hallway for several minutes, staring at the wall. Then she walked back into the main room. Micah looked up. They just posted it. He turned his laptop screen so she could see. Jetline official issues formal apology for suppression of engineer's report. Internal review promised. There, beneath the headline, was a subheading. Callie Venson, 17, daughter of Evelyn Venson, cited as source of leaked documents that prompted FAA investigation. It didn't feel like glory. It felt like gravity, like something old and buried had finally been pulled to the surface, gasping in the light. Jonas looked up from his spot on the couch. What did your mom say? She said I finished what she started. He nodded slowly, pride quiet in his expression. You know, Micah said after a while, most whistleblowers never get this moment. They disappear. They're discredited. Their stories die quietly. Callie stared at the screen. Then maybe it's time we stop letting them die. Micah tilted his head. You thinking of going public? She didn't answer immediately. Then she stood, walked over to the table, and picked up her mom's old notebook. I'm not going public, she said. I am the public now. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Callie turned to them, her eyes clear. Meaning I won't just hand this over and fade away. I'm going to be louder, visible. They can try to scare me, but I know what happens when good people stay quiet. Micah smiled. You know, with the way people are responding, you could testify. You could speak in D.C. You could lead a whole campaign around this. Callie held the notebook against her chest. Then let's start by making sure no one forgets her name. She didn't mean her own. She meant Evelyn Venson, the woman who had buried her truth in silence, and whose daughter had dug it back out with fire. The next 48 hours blurred into a strange, pulsing current of momentum. Callie hardly slept. She didn't need to. Exhaustion was there, of course, deep in her bones, but it was layered under something stronger. Clarity. Purpose. The kind that buzzed in her veins and made each moment feel urgent, like the next step was always the most important one. By the end of the second day, her name was everywhere. Not sensationalized, not overexposed, but repeated with respect, cautious admiration. Callie Venson, 17-year-old student, had been the silent key that reopened one of the most buried corporate scandals in aviation history. News outlets across the country began replaying excerpts from the original documents, pages showing Evelyn Venson's early technical concerns, hand-marked diagrams of the ALDRP failure patterns, and even a dated internal memo bearing Nolan Aldrin's signature, recommending quiet reassignment of any engineer who continued to challenge the company's narrative. And then came the footage. Jonas had kept it for years, unsure what to do with it. A single grainy video taken on a flip phone by a former intern during Evelyn's final meeting, before her resignation. It showed her standing at the far end of a corporate boardroom, pointing to a whiteboard, while voices interrupted, dismissed, and redirected her findings. You could barely hear her speak, but you could see it in her eyes, the frustration, the fear, the refusal to bend. Micah published it in a follow-up article captioned only, "You tried to silence her." We heard her anyway. The video went viral overnight. Thousands shared it with messages like, "I see my mother in her," and "This is why we need more women in engineering, especially ones who don't back down." Somewhere in all the noise, Evelyn Venson, who had disappeared into the margins of the aviation industry for 2 decades, was finally being remembered not as the woman who quit quietly, but as the one who saw what others refused to see. But even as the public support surged, Callie knew the real battle had only begun. There were still hearings to attend. Aldrin had vanished, reportedly placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Rumors circulated that other executives had quietly resigned. The FAA had announced a full review of Jetline's engineering certification history, and several former employees, inspired by the leak, came forward with corroborating stories. Callie spent her mornings on video calls with legal advisors and journalists, her afternoons on quiet walks with Jonas, and her evenings going through boxes of her mother's old documents, piece by piece. She now understood what she was looking for, not just more evidence but the full arc of her mother's truth, the complete picture of what Evelyn had endured and protected. On the third morning, a letter arrived by courier. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a typed note. "Miss Venson, some people will thank you, some will fear you, but most will forget you, unless you remind them again and again why you mattered. That's your choice now. The system counts on your silence after the spotlight fades. Don't let it win. A friend of Evelyn's." Callie read it twice, then a third time. She didn't know who sent it. Maybe it was Elliot. Maybe someone else her mother had once trusted. But she knew it was right. The real power wasn't in what she had already done. It was in what she would choose to do next. A week later, Callie stepped onto a stage in Washington, D.C., wearing a navy blazer and her mother's old watch. The room was packed with lawmakers, journalists, aviation officials, and people who had been watching her story from afar. Some believed in her, some didn't, but they were all there because she refused to go away. She approached the microphone slowly, then took a deep breath. "I'm not here because I wanted attention," she began, her voice clear. "I'm here because my mother tried to save lives and instead they buried her. They pushed her out, erased her name, and hoped no one would ask questions. And for 20 years, no one did." She glanced toward the front row where Evelyn sat silently, eyes shining but proud. "My mom didn't raise her voice in that boardroom all those years ago. Not because she wasn't angry, but because she thought facts would speak louder than fear. And they should have. But they didn't." Callie paused, then looked directly at the cameras. "So now I'm speaking, not just for her, but for everyone who's ever told the truth and been punished for it. For the interns who don't speak up because they're afraid of losing their jobs. For the women who leave brilliant careers because someone decided they were inconvenient. For the ones who died before anyone believed them." The room was completely still. "I'm not asking you to believe me," she finished. "I'm asking you to remember what happens when you don't." When she stepped back, the silence broke into applause. Soft at first, then stronger. It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And Callie felt its weight settle on her shoulders like something earned, not given. Later, Evelyn hugged her in the hallway. "You said everything I never could," she whispered. "No," Callie replied. "You said it. I just made sure they finally listened." That night, Callie sat in her hotel room, staring out the window as light sparkled across the city skyline. Somewhere, in offices and homes and conference rooms, the fallout was still happening. But she wasn't afraid of it anymore. The world had changed, and she had changed it. Not with a shout, but with a truth that refused to stay buried. The girl in seat 3C had become the woman who rewrote the ending. And she wasn't done yet. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful